Hey everyone, Jake here with the Tattoo Improvement Network. Today we have a little bonus episode of the Fireside podcast. We've gotten a lot of questions over the years, or last few months in particular, of folks wanting some tips on tattooing portraits, and been asked to do technique videos and things like that on the subject. And it's just not something that I've really explored enough to have an educated opinion on, and I definitely don't have a defined process for stenciling and tattooing portraits. So what we did is we teamed up with Dax McClellan for this interview, and he actually has a portrait system that he has developed over a period of years to do black and gray portraits. And this is a Skype interview, which is a platform I'm not super comfortable with. Honestly, a platform I'm not really crazy about. I don't know that you'll see a lot of these. I much prefer to be in the same room with the person that we're interviewing. In this case, we just couldn't make it happen. But I hope you'll get some value out of it anyways. If you're interested in Dax's portrait course, we'll link to it in the show notes. And now we're not affiliated with Dax in any way. As far as the portrait course goes, I can't. I haven't been through it myself, so I'm not sure what to tell you. But I would encourage you to explore it and see if it's something that might work for you. Check it out. I hope you get something from it. All right, we're gonna try this thing. Hey everybody, welcome to the Fireside Tattoo Podcast. This is completely new for me. I'm trying a Skype interview, so if it's terrible, blame Dax, not me. This is Dax
I'll take
McClellan.
the blame.
Right, this is Dax McClellan, and we were just talking. We spent, I don't know, the last hour trying to figure out how to make this work, but we were just talking about he's just made the move to Florida and how I might just have to hop on a plane and go down there so we can have this conversation in person. And who knows, maybe we'll find a time to do that anyways.
Down.
All right. So we get a lot on our technique series. We get a lot of questions about portrait work, about tattooing portraits. Everyone wants to see a tutorial on it, and of course there are some good tutorials online. Not really thorough, but there are some pretty good tutorials online. But then when you reached out and sent some of your work over and it kind of showed that you were specializing in that field, I thought, well, that's a great opportunity to maybe teach our viewers something that I'm not educated enough to speak on. So let's talk for a second just about your background in tattooing. Before tattooing, were you a portrait artist? Were you trained in art school, or are you kind of self-taught?
That's a great question, man. I mean, so first off, I'm self-taught. I mean, and it goes all the way back to fucking my first day of preschool. I walked out when my teacher wanted me to draw a circle, and I was drawing aliens and little ants having wars and shit. So, I ended up walking out, going back home. And then an art teacher came to my mother's house, and she's like, I want to teach this guy how to draw. And that's kind of where I started. Now, so I guess I've been drawing, all my life. I picked up a tattoo machine when I was about 13 years old. Actually, it wasn't even a tattoo machine. We'll call it a tattoo gun, because that's exactly what it was. Yeah. And I got that, I was involved I was a little troublemaker when I was younger. And so I just started picking up this tattoo gun and just fucking up all kinds of my friends. And then I eventually ended up getting good. I took my tattooing seriously, when I turned 18, I got into a shop, and like I said, I was self-taught, but I went into this shop, and I remember it was actually called Vicious Ink, and it was in Layton City, Utah. The owners are Vic Vegas and Ryan Eugene. They actually work for Infinite Tattoo now, but I remember going into this shop, and I brought my portfolio in, brought all my stuff. I was ready to tattoo in front of them or do whatever it took, because I was just ready to, take I was trying to make a career out of this. And this is actually the second shop that I went into, and let's jump back a little bit. So the first shop I went into, I don't want to state the name just because I don't want to start a bunch of bullshit drama, but I walked into this shop. He was, a good friend of my family's. He got, he did all my mother's tattoos, all my stepfather's tattoos, and I went into his shop with all my stuff, asking, what it would take to have an apprenticeship. And he looked at my stuff and really bluntly, he basically said, he's like, go get a real job. You'll never become a tattoo artist.
Hmm.
And
What
that
was his
was,
logic there? He just didn't like the portfolio, didn't like the quality of the work, or what?
to be honest, I don't know. Like it seemed like it was a projection. Maybe he was having a bad day. I don't know, but he treated me like crap, and I mean it hurt. But at the same time, I used that pain to kind of motivate me because I was already doing little tattoos, and by that time I was getting decent with it. So I didn't let it stop me, and then fast forward back to when I stepped into Vicious Ink with Ryan and Vic, I asked them to apprentice me, and they basically said, they're like, dude, you're already good enough. We'll just start you as an artist, and maybe we'll throw some ideas your way if you need them, but for the most part, you're hitting the ground rolling. And so that's kind of how I got started.
Okay, so no real formal apprenticeship. What about the transition to portraiture? Was that a? I mean, that's a big jump to take for a tattooer. It requires, well, for one thing, it requires mastery, technical mastery, right? I mean, because you can't really, uh, if you're not if you're not getting really solid blends, really smooth transitions, small imperfections really stand out in portrait work much more than they do, say, in like American traditional or any other style of work.
I
So,
agree.
yeah. So making that jump to portraits, or I wouldn't. I guess it's probably not a jump. It's probably a transition. How did that transition happen? Were you always someone that liked to draw faces? Did you draw a lot of? Did you focus on realism as a kid, or did that evolve over throughout your tattooing?
That's a good question, man. So, actually, that was my first portrait. So, I basically drew my friend as my very first portrait. He ended up committing suicide while I was about 18 in front of me, and
Oh,
so it was a painful memory. But I mean, I believe that's what forced me, to do portraits, and not only just a portrait, but I remember looking back and while I was drawing it, it was, I guess, not only is it a memorial, but it was such a meaningful, like, such a big impact on my life that I just pushed myself through all the bullshit, all the challenges, because I felt the worst pain that I could ever feel, like, so, I mean, I believe that that's what kind of pushed me through to do that portrait in the first place, because I was drawing it for his mother.
okay, okay. Well, let's talk a little bit about some of the learning curves of portraiture. For tattoos to last a long time, we preach a lot on our show about the importance of high contrast, of getting a full value range. A lot of people when they first start tattooing, they think there's like safety in midtones and working all in kind of like lighter and midtones, and of course those tattoos don't hold. They don't really stand the test of time. Do you have any practical advice you can give for someone wanting to take on portraits and maybe hasn't taken that step yet?
Yes. I mean, obviously I don't believe in a magic pill formula. So if somebody's looking for like a straight up, like, here's the pill, pop it, like, I don't have one of those.
Sure.
But what I teach to, kind of the tattoo artists that look to me for how to do portraits is first, I mean, obviously this is common sense. You start on paper. And if you can't, I mean, basically whatever you can draw on paper, you can tattoo if you know how to use the tools. Now, if you can't draw it on paper, it would be kind of stupid to expect that you can tattoo it, you know.
Hmm. Sure.
And so what I preach is, first learn how to do the portraits on paper, and not only that, but learn how to do them at a really high level. Learn how to master the main facial features of the face. I mean, it all starts on paper as far as the detail work and contrast and all that.
Yeah.
Once you have that down, and all the facial features and all that, then I mean, there's a little transition between paper and skin, and that's what I like to call the test portrait. And the test portrait is basically a portrait of something that you can kind of get away with without it looking like completely perfect, since it's your first, type of realism piece. You can kind of get away with it being decent but not perfect, and then it's up to self-awareness of like, okay, looking at the reference picture and looking at how that tattoo came out. And as far as test portraits, I guess a good example of a test portrait would be like, tattooing a realistic rose or something, and then comparing that to the reference picture. If it looks, if it doesn't match the reference picture, then you probably shouldn't start tattooing like a human portrait, because you don't have your tones down, you don't have something down. You'll be able to see it in your paper, but it comes to self-awareness.
Yeah, yeah. Um, what about photographic reference? People will bring in, especially now with smartphones and things like that, they'll want a photo and they bring in these really terrible photos of maybe a loved one that they've lost, and it's the lighting is terrible. Maybe the face is all washed out. I've always, like I said, I'm not a portrait tattooer. I do paint portraits pretty regularly, but not. I don't tattoo them. I'm really big on working from great reference or not doing it at all. Do you agree with that, or do you have ways to manipulate the reference material? Maybe if you've got a less than perfect photo, a less than ideal reference photo to work from.
Great question, man. So yes and yes to both of those. So, if I can't fix their portrait, I do know a way to make a portrait look better, add some dimension to it and all that. And that's actually, part of my portrait course. But that's through Photoshop and all that. But at the same time, like, if I look at this picture and I know that I can't make a quality tattoo out of it, because there's some portraits that they might want but won't necessarily come out as a good tattoo.
Right.
I'm not afraid to turn down a client and really take more time to help them look through other pictures that might come out better.
Yeah, yeah. And sometimes I think maybe they might have a photo that they really like of this person, and it's not a great reference photo for a tattoo. So, what I've always thought is a good idea is to say, hey, why don't you bring me 3 to 5 photos and let me choose the one that works the best for a tattoo? Because, most of the time these people don't draw for a living. They don't know
Right.
what makes a tattooable portrait and what makes a non-tattooable portrait. So options, I think, are always pretty important. What do you
Definitely.
think? Yeah.
Yeah, I agree, man. Actually, I do the exact same thing. I tell them, say, bring 3 photos. That way we can go through them together.
Right, right. Okay, so moving into, and as we go along, I know you have a portrait system that you actually teach, and I definitely want to get into that. But I always try to pull as much kind of practical advice out as I can during the shows, just that people can kind of plug and play. And I know there's no magic pill like you said, but talk for a second about stenciling. You have people like Nico Hurtado, like someone like Steve Butcher, who does a lot of not necessarily portraits but realism, who just when I look at their stencils, I can make absolutely no sense out of them. There's so much going on in their stencils. I'm like, man, if you put that down in front of me, I wouldn't know what to do with it. And then there are other people, like we interviewed Alex DePasse not that long ago, and he takes a much more minimalistic approach to his stencils. What are your ideas on personally on how you stencil portraits?
I believe that there's no one size fits all. I believe, like, what I tell people is, I'll give them the basics. I actually, I'll talk about, doing really detailed, stencils, and then I talk about the minimalistic on both ends. But really it comes down to, you as an artist, you have to know yourself and you have to know what you can see. Like, obviously you don't want to make it so minimalistic to where you can't pick up details when you look at the reference picture, but at the same time, you don't want to make it so complicated. Even if a pro's doing that, like Nico Hurtado, you don't want to make it so complicated to where you don't know what the hell you're doing.
You have people, or pretty often when people are drawing faces, you get this preconceived idea of what, let's say, what lips look like, or what an eye looks like, or what, for example, the whites of the eye. People tend to want to make those things white, and very often they're not white at all. Almost never. They're recessed, they're in a socket, and they're actually a lot darker than, say, like the bridge of the nose or the forehead. Do you
Right.
have is it just trial and error, or is in your system do you have practical ways that you address those types of things as far as looking at value and comparing values from area to area.
Yes, actually, in module two, that's where, because this goes back to drawing, once again, and in my module two, that's where it's all about, the main facial features and how to master them, how to understand, maybe how the eye is like in there in the socket, and it's basically like a ball wrapped with skin. That kind of
Mm-hmm.
sounds weird, but I go through all the facial features and just
Yeah.
how to understand them on a deeper level.
Right, right. Do you have a minimum, say, size that you like to work in? We haven't gotten too much into where portrait placement. When we're wrapping images on a body, it's really easy to distort those images. Is there kind of a minimum size that you like to work in, or is there a maximum size that you like to work in as far as tattooing portraits?
Um, I honestly, I mean, my preference is I like to go big, but at the same time, like you still can go decently small. I don't think I would do a face maybe. I mean, I've done faces that are like, the size of a quarter, and I mean, the thing is like the bigger you go, the more details you can add. Um, but I really think that comes down to personal preference and what you feel comfortable with.
Yeah, yeah. Let's talk for a second about the placement. You're wrapping. Well, first off, let me back up. Any small change in a person, right, in a portrait, changes who that person is. You're talking about millimeters difference. So you might make a portrait that looks like a person, but it's difficult to make it look like that person. So added to that challenge is wrapping that portrait around an area of a body which naturally distorts it.
Right.
What any thoughts on that? How you deal with it? How you address it?
Yes. So usually I'll try to talk my clients into putting it on a flatter part of the body, first off. Not only that, but this is kind of like a general rule with tattooing. At least I think it's general. I heard about it a long time ago, but you always make faces. I mean, if it's a flat-on face, this is different, but you always want to make faces and stuff aim inward towards the body. It just looks a little more natural.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but if they are like totally set on somewhere around the placement, I'll make sure that it at least fits the shape of that muscle. Like you don't want to put a face halfway on the shoulder and then halfway on the bicep where you can clearly see there's a groove, because it's going to look like a portrait like the dude off of the Goonies or something.
Right, right, yeah, yeah. Speaking of, you mentioned straight on portrait. Do you prefer to use 3/4 angles, straight on angles? Do you have a preference, or is it just whatever the client likes?
I like a variation. Obviously, like I try to like meet in the middle. I'll tell them what I prefer and then what they prefer. But I do know one thing I like is I like to do, lately I've been getting really into like, contrasting portraits where there's a different kind of like light source maybe on one side, and then there's some cool looking shadows in it. Like
Hmm.
I think it just looks cool.
Yeah, yeah. I noticed that the people that I see that I feel like handle portraits the most successfully, a lot of times they really, really focus on one light source and push the contrast, almost exaggerate the shadow areas on the other side, which helps with longevity, getting a full value range. But I think it just makes for a more interesting composition too, whenever you have a really strong light source and some really strong shadows as well. Yeah.
Um, What do you wait? Can you expand on that a little bit more?
Well, say instead of having like a soft light that kind of covers the entire face, maybe a really concentrated light, a 3/4 view, maybe where the light really strikes one side of the face hard, and so you have a nice strong cast shadow, maybe of the nose or onto the cheek, or you lose the back edge of the face where it wraps around by the ear because it gets really dark on one side, and so you really are able to kind of drive the viewer's focus towards one area of the head and let other areas kind of dissipate or go away. Nico Hurtado does that quite a bit. He'll have some really dark darks in his portraits, and then some really strong lights as well.
Yeah, I definitely think that's, a good thing. As long as, I mean, if you're starting, number one, like I always recommend, go with the reference and don't try to change anything. Obviously, Nico Hurtado is like a wizard, and
Yeah.
he understands portraits on a higher level than just the basics. So he can manipulate it in a little different way and add his own twist to it, and that's awesome. But I really think like, yes, you want to have your super dark blacks and you want to have your super light grays. And that's what actually adds a lot of contrast and
Sure.
balance with a piece.
Yeah, yeah. So what got you into just into tattoo education? What made you decide that you were going to start trying to put your processes down in a way where you could teach them to other people?
Um, Man, that's a good question. And it starts from that first tattoo shop that I walked in when that dude told me that he basically didn't want to help me. And then I started seeing commonalities in this industry of like, a lot of tattoo artists almost hide they don't want to share their stuff, or they just think it's not right or something. I mean, ultimately, like, the only way that we are going to truly know what's possible on skin and push the boundary is to help people out and see what they're capable of.
Right.
And eventually, I mean, I actually started to have people asking me, oh, how do you do this, how do you do that? And I mean, I guess I got a loud mouth or something. I don't know, but
Yeah.
I got a talent with my hand and I got a talent with my mouth. So I think those combined, like, it helped me out. And I just was like, hey, man, maybe I got something in this because people are asking me for it, and I can teach it. I think there's a difference between being able to do good portraits and being able to teach them. Some people can do great fucking portraits, but they can't explain worth a damn, like, how to do them, in a
Sure.
practical way. But I know how to break it down into simple, like Steve Jobs.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, okay, so let's talk a little bit about the actual system that you built. I guess it's a video series. Is it? You mentioned an ebook. How is it structured?
Okay, so my ebook that's coming out, The Savage Way, that's completely separate. That's something that just about to release. But the realistic portrait system course, it's basically an 8-week course minimum. I mean, there's bonuses and all kinds of stuff, so it goes on longer. But it's basically 8 weeks of training videos from A to Z when it comes to, portraits, from drawing them to tattooing them to improving them, fixing the pictures or the photo reference, through Photoshop and everything like that. We also have an online mastermind group on Facebook it's basically a private group for only students only. We
Hmm.
got about 100 tattoo students and mentors in there, so it's a
Uh,
really good community, man.
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
amazed.
Yeah, that's awesome. Those mentorship groups or those private Facebook groups are really valuable. So many online educators are using them, and they're free and they're to set up, and you just let people in, and I found that it really does like generate a lot of like community and a lot of people bouncing ideas off of each other and helping each other improve. We're experimenting with that now with our Inside Fireside group, and I really like it. It's such a simple way to communicate, and everyone's on there anyways. If they're already on Facebook, they may as well just click on the group. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
definitely. And I mean, it's a great place for people to get questions answered. And I mean, there's no one right way to do things. One way somebody does it might not necessarily work, but then, if you got a bunch of people you can bounce ideas off of, I mean, it's like, maybe one of those will work. And I mean, the strength is in numbers.
yeah, yeah. I think that's one of the. I think you're right. I think that's one of the strongest aspects of it is that sometimes I might not word something in a way that makes sense to someone, or it doesn't speak to someone the same way that someone else can say the same thing using different words, and it clicks. So
Yeah.
I think the more that you hear, even though we're all talking about the same ideas in our group, it's a lot of structural foundation drawing. So we talk a lot about shapes and value and edges and things like that. And but it's just all in how you phrase it sometimes. Like I may say something and it doesn't register, and then someone else in the group says the exact same thing and words it differently, and people are like, oh yeah, I get that, that makes more sense. So yeah, there's a ton of value to just having different people throwing around ideas, because someone will say something that clicks with you.
Definitely.
So what about this? What about the ebook? What is it? A portrait? book as well, the one that's not released yet, the Savage. What is it? The Savage Way.
Okay, so the Savage Way is it's not specifically on portraits, but a lot of the stuff that it goes through can definitely be used for portraits. But it's basically an underground playbook for tattoo artists looking to expand into realism.
Okay.
So I go through basically everything that I've had questions on and everything that I think, people need to know and more. And I put it all into this fucking book and I compressed it, cut all the filler and all the fat. And so it's just 100% gold, just a bunch of bite-sized nuggets that you can just take and implement into your tattooing like right away.
Awesome, awesome. So where the the portrait course, is there a limited? Do you take on a limited number of people? Is it open for a limited period of time, or is it something people can just go and grab at their own convenience?
Good question. So it's not readily available. And the reason why is because I don't have a huge team behind me. So I want to make sure that if I, offer you this opportunity to learn how to do portraits, that I can give you the ultimate experience from, sending you the videos to also like helping interact in the Facebook group. And it's not so overwhelming. Like maybe eventually one day I might make it open for everybody. But for right now, like basically I just throw it out sometimes on Facebook's, most of the time through my email subscriber list for all the people who subscribe to my website. And I just throw it out there like, hey, we're accepting people for the next 2 weeks. If you want to learn how to tattoo portraits, jump in before we close. So
Yeah, yeah. We, when we first started talking about the Inside Fireside group and thinking we might help some people with some foundation drawing skills, at first I thought we would just shoot some videos and shoot it out there and let 10,000 people or all of our YouTube followers uh, take it on and give feedback. And I'm so glad we didn't do that, because what I didn't realize is that we were going to fall on our face. You're going to screw up. And we only took 12 people. And it's so much nicer to screw up in front of 12 people than it is to screw up in front of 10,000 people. You can make these small mistakes and like, whatever, maybe the video didn't come out well, or the course, like the download doesn't work, or something technical goes wrong. And, you don't have 10,000 people coming back saying this shit doesn't work. You have 12 people, and they all, it's a much tighter knit group, and we're able to like make mistakes, get feedback, perfect it, and then roll it out a little bigger, which, if anyone who's in the digital information business, listen to those words. Don't screw up in front of 10,000 people. It's a bad idea. Uh,
I completely agree, man. You
yeah,
got to take it step by step. You can't jump the steps.
yeah. So, are you about to open enrollment sometime soon for the portrait course, or is it open now?
It's actually closed right now. But we are opening enrollment during my free webinar, and that's one thing I'd
Okay.
like to talk about.
Yeah. Shoot. What's on the webinar?
So let's see. I got a little bit of notes right here just to make sure I got the dates correct. So it's basically called the Realistic Portrait Tattoo Training Webinar. It's a free webinar, and you can join either from your computer or mobile phone as long as you download the app. It's a GoToWebinar app,
Okay.
and all the instructions are basically I can send them to you like when people register.
Hmm.
But this webinar, basically, it's like something that's never been done in the industry. Like I've never seen it done, but I'm doing this free webinar where we go through three topics, and then I also am releasing the ebook right at the same time. I'm actually releasing, doing a pre-release where they get a little discount. So it's going to be $27 for the ebook when you register for the webinar. So right when you register for the webinar, you fill out your information, name, email, phone number, and then the next page it'll say thank you for registering. The webinar is actually October 26th. It's at
Okay.
5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern,
Okay.
and but right when they register, like you don't have to wait for the webinar. Like you can jump in and get the Savage Way book right then, and you get that discount. Now the price is going to go up. I don't know how much, and I don't know when, but like I said, I'm just throwing it out there. This is kind of like, I didn't want to like totally bomb it like you were saying, don't throw it
Right.
out to 10,000 people. So
Yeah.
on this webinar, I put a limit to only 200 tattoo artists can join this webinar. So the first 200 people, they're going to be able to get the discount on the Savage Way, and they can jump on this free webinar. Now the free webinar is it's a 1 hour webinar, and I basically go through 3 topics. So the first topic would be how to make your tattoos look more realistic without overworking the skin and screwing your clients up. So I go through and give a bunch of tips on that. I also go through, my secret technique that transformed my black and gray portraits from something that I feared, like every tattoo artist when they first start, to something that I actually love doing. Like that's what I enjoy doing the most is a portrait. It's just it's a little more meaningful to I guess it's a more memorial piece. So, being able to do a portrait on a client's skin is just it's that next level of meaningful impacts to your clients, and it just feels so good when somebody looks at their arm and it looks good. It looks like their memorial piece, and I mean it just feels good to help your clients that way. I can't even count how many times I've had somebody cry in a good way, just from doing a good portrait.
Yeah,
And then
absolutely.
the third topic on my webinar that I'm going to go through is it's a technique for smooth shading and improving the transition between gray shades, because I know there's a lot of tattoo artists. That's probably the biggest question I get is how do you shade smoother? How do you transition your tones and without making them look choppy? And I have I wouldn't call it a magic pill, but I have a little secret technique that I go through, and I'm going to be sharing that on the webinar, as well as the details of my realistic portrait, the actual system on how I do the portraits. And then I'm going to go through a Q&A. It's actually probably going to be a little longer than an hour, but I'm going to go through. I just I want to give a ton of value to people, help them out, and then go through the Q&A. And then after that, I'm going to give the details of my course and open enrollment for everybody who wants to join and learn how to tattoo portraits.
Okay, all right. You want to shoot me that information and we can just plug it in the show notes on this show? Is that cool?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
And
yes.
all right, we'll do that. So guys, look below this video, and we'll have whatever information that you need to get to that and to get the ebook as well. Anything else you want to add? I know we don't want to get with you covering a lot of it in the webinar. We don't want to dig too deep on details of portraiture, but anything that you feel like that I missed that you wanted to hit on?
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about some of the stuff in the actual ebook, because the ebook is the latest thing I've been working on, man. I've done I've been working on it for a year, and
Wow.
I edited it twice. Then I had a professional editor even edit it again. I'm actually looking for other companies to help work with me so that I can add links, maybe discounts to their supply companies and stuff like that. Just because I plan on giving this ebook out. I want it to be the #1 black and gray realism ebook out there, and I really believe it has that potential. But it goes through so much things, as far as specifics, it goes through, we go through stencil techniques, reference, it goes through like the difference between tattooing on tighter skin versus looser skin and different body placements, like, the calf compared to the ribs. We also go through, how to tattoo darker skin and the difference between darker skin and lighter skin.
Yeah,
And
that's a
then
big one.
I even go
Yeah.
through like tattooing over freckles. And then as far as realism, I have another system as far as like what needles you start with and then what needles you end with, and how to do the white highlights, to a high level. I also go through, let's see, what else? Man, there's so much stuff in there.
Yeah, it
I
sounds like
really,
it. It sounds like it. I'm glad that we were able to line this up, because we do get a fair number of questions on that subject, on everything that you covered, really, portraiture in general, dealing with white. A lot of people are curious about using white, whether you should try to use fields of white, or whether you should only use white selectively and in highlights, and how white holds up over time. There are so many questions out there. It sounds like you're dealing with a lot of those things that
Yes.
obviously people want to know, because we get those questions constantly.
Right.
Yeah. So
Um, oh, go
and
ahead.
the ebook outside of the webinar, for people who maybe aren't able to make the webinar, will it be offered? Are you going to do a replay of the webinar, or do you know, or is it just going to be live and then gone?
Right now, I don't know if I'm going to do a webinar replay.
Okay.
I would like to just have everybody that's serious about this, jump on the webinar, make sure you make it, and just go for it, and then we'll take it from there. I might do another webinar later, but I don't know if I'm going to have a replay.
Okay.
Um,
But you'll make
but
the ebook available to people even that don't make the webinar, or
yes, I mean, like I said, like out of this webinar, it's going to be at a higher price.
sure.
Um, but for the people that do join, like I said, right when you register your information, the next page you can get the ebook. Oh, and one more thing I decided to add into the ebook was it's a little discount code, and the discount code is actually, so if you get the ebook, you actually get a discount on the realistic portrait system training course
Okay.
when you get that, and it's a $50 discount when you pay in full for the course.
Okay.
So you'll get the discount code, if you want to learn how to tattoo portraits and stuff like that. um, and Oh, one more thing, and this isn't for the ebook, but if you like at the end of the webinar, one of the things I've decided to do is, and this is basically like I wanted to make it available for anybody that really wants to. Like, this isn't a cheap little tutorial. If we're gonna like compare it to tutorials, I mean, it's gonna be like I've got over 48 tutorials in this training course. So it's
Pretty
definitely
thorough.
a huge, thorough, detailed course. Um, but it's not, $100. Like it's actually decently priced. I mean, it's nothing to what you would pay like for a professional portrait apprenticeship, if you can even get one of those from a really good artist. But it's definitely, in between like 500 and $1,000. But I wanted to also make it available for people who couldn't afford that. So if you do enroll in the webinar and you go through the whole thing, I'm going through and I'm giving a little special way to where we break down monthly payments of like 100, and you can actually try it 2 weeks for free just to see if it's right for you, and just to make sure that you can actually get some value out of it first.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think we're getting to a point now with tattooers where they realize the potential in investing, or the value, sorry, in investing in themselves. We're tattoos aren't cheap anymore. So you're talking about $1,000 product. If it puts you on a higher level, say in portrait tattooing, and suddenly your minimum charge or your hourly rate can go up $25 per hour. Maybe your minimum goes from $300 to $450. It only takes a couple of tattoos to pay for $1,000 product, and you get out of these types of things what you put into them anyways. So you can pay $1,000 for a product and half-ass your way through it and get nothing out of it, or you can pay
Right.
$1,000 for a product and work and use the information, and it'll turn out to be a great asset, and you'll make money off of it.
I agree, man. And
Yeah.
I mean, like, some of the, like, I've had tattoo artists say, like, well, I can't afford this. And it's like, with 2 weeks, like, as far as the training course, the realistic portrait system, by being able to try it for 2 weeks, you're going to know how to tattoo, or excuse me, not tattoo, you're going to know how to draw portraits at a really good level at that point, to where you can get paid for commissioned portraits. And you can, I mean, as long as you do one or two of these portraits per month, that's how you pay for this course.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And so that's one way. But also, like, I wanted to let people know, like, it's not a ton of work to do portraits. Like, the way I broke down my training course, it takes, some of my students say, like, it takes maybe 40 minutes to 2 hours per week to do. So it's really not that much time invested as long as you're consistent and you schedule it out, like, and just follow the steps, just like, we explain, like, you can learn how to tattoo portraits.
Yeah, yeah. Well, man, that's awesome. I'm glad we did this. I hate that it took us an hour to figure out how to use Skype and record it, but other than that, it went really well. If people want to see your work or book appointments or anything like that, I know you just relocated to Florida. Where do people go to either look at your portfolio or to book tattoos?
Okay, so to book tattoos, I've been so right now my focus is obviously on the transition out here and focusing on this webinar. So I don't think I'm going to be taking on tattoos right now
Okay.
until I get established and kind of settled in here.
Hmm.
But that might be a future thing. They would maybe find me on a social media or something. We could talk about that there. But
Okay.
if you want to see, my artwork, you can look at my website, tattooingportraits.com. There's actually, free resources. There's free valuable content on my blog and stuff like that for tattooers. And you can also just find me on, social media. So from YouTube, it's Tattooing Portraits. From Facebook, it's Dax McClellan. That's my full name. And then on Instagram, it's Savage Dax, just like it sounds.
Okay. All right. We'll try to link to all those things in the, or if we can link to all of them. If not, we'll select a few and link so people can find you and keep up with your work. And man, thanks for taking the time. I hope everyone got some good information out of this. Guys, go to tattooimprovement.com. Sign up for our newsletter. We're bouncing around. We're doing all kinds of places soon. Man, we're lining up. We're headed to Hyperspace Studios to spend a little time with Guy Etchison soon, which I'm really excited
Oh,
about.
yeah.
Can't wait to watch him work and pick his brain a little bit. And then we're bouncing around some conventions the first of the year, so make sure to keep up with where we're going to be. Make sure not to miss this webinar. I guess it's about a week or so from today. Today's the 17th, and you said it's the 26th, something like that.
Yes. Yes, October
Okay.
26th.
Okay. Well, we'll make sure to get this out in plenty of time for people to arrange their schedules so they make it. So, man,
Awesome.
dude, I really appreciate it. Thanks for taking the time. Stay on for just a second if you don't mind, and I'm going to make sure that we're in good shape here. I might have to get a little more info from you. Thanks, guys. Have a good one.